I saw the pilot episode of The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and then I couldn't watch anymore because it struck too close to home for me
Mm.
because they're in this doomsday cult. One of the women is being interviewed about it, and she talks about how, well, I met this guy outside of a steakhouse, and he wanted to like talk to me, and I didn't want to be rude, so here we are. And her meaning
Mm.
was like, I didn't want to be rude, so I spent 20 years underground in a bunker being a part
Unbelievable.
of a cult. And that
Mm.
sounds crazy, but we do a version of that all the time, constantly, of like,
Constantly.
I didn't want to be rude, so I got in the elevator with someone I felt terrified of, or, I got in the car when I knew someone was drinking, or fill in the blank here because I didn't want to be rude or I didn't want to
Yeah.
make other people feel uncomfortable.
This show is all about helping you up-level your life, including your well-being, your relationships, your mental health, your wealth, your confidence, and your joy. I challenge you to keep an open mind as together we discover tips, tools, and advice from the experts to help you live life to your fullest potential. Welcome to the Jenna Banks Show. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I have a really wonderful show lined up for you. My guest today, her name is Caroline Garnet McGraw, and she wrote this amazing book, You Don't Owe Anyone. And right here on the cover, she says, you don't owe anyone the good child. You don't owe anyone your spiritual allegiance. You don't owe anyone a savior. You don't owe anyone a brave face. You don't owe anyone superhuman strength. You don't owe anyone your compliance. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't owe anyone your time and attention. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't owe anyone, period. Free yourself from the weight of expectations. Oh my goodness, I've been reading this book and it is absolutely phenomenal. So I can't wait to get into this conversation with Caroline. Now, she is also a TEDx speaker and a coach for recovering perfectionists. As the creator of the website A Wish Come Clear, she supports thousands of people in trading in perfectionism for possibility. Caroline, thank you so much for being here with me to have this wonderful conversation.
Jenna, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely my pleasure. I am so in love with your book. Just the title alone, You Don't Owe Anyone, is just incredible. Now, you wrote this after having written like a viral article, right?
That is right. Yes. I wrote a viral article on the Huffington Post. It later became a TEDx talk. And I was writing a memoir at the time. And I was lucky to find an editor who said, we need to take this viral concept. That needs to be the foundation of your book. Believe it or not, I had not had that epiphany. You would think that would have been very obvious. But as soon as she said it, I realized, oh, I get to tell my story, but it needs to be in this way that is incredibly directed and helpful and specific to people. So every chapter is something that you don't owe anyone. So you don't owe anyone your spiritual allegiance. You don't owe anyone a brave face. You don't owe anyone an interaction. So it really applies to your life.
That is right here on the cover, y'all. It's like, you don't owe anyone your time and energy.
Mm-hmm.
So good. So good. Now, somebody listening to that right now might be thinking, God, that sounds selfish. That sounds mean. That sounds rude. How would you respond to that?
For me, the biggest realization has been you don't owe anyone doesn't mean go out and be selfish, go out and take things from other people. It's just a shift in reclaiming what's already yours. It's about realizing they are my time and energy. It is my money, my love, my devotion. These things belong to me. So to me, that's the shift. It's not go out and be entitled and be a jerk. It's
right.
Remember what's yours.
Yeah. And that's so good because it also relates to boundaries, right? I love that you mentioned time, attention, money, your resources. These are yours.
Yeah.
You own them. Nobody else does. And so I think it's a huge shift in thinking like, for example, if someone walks up to you out of nowhere and, for some reason, us women especially, we feel this need to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
I call it the
Mm-hmm.
nice girl syndrome. We feel this need to just, oh, they must need something from me. I'm needed, and so of course I owe them. I owe them my time and attention. I owe them my interaction. And not even thinking that maybe this person is no good. Maybe they have bad intentions. Maybe thinking about our younger sisters, maybe they are going to lure you in and traffic you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you owe someone your time and attention then? No, we owe ourselves our protection, right? We owe ourselves we owe ourselves first, which I think is a concept it's not ingrained in so many of us, and women especially. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm so glad you brought that up because the story that begins the book is very much along the same lines.
Mm.
So I'll sum
Yeah.
it up
Okay, perfect.
briefly.
Yes.
I received a series of Facebook messages a number of years ago. This is, I'm happily married. I have not interacted with this person in many years. And this was someone who had made a pass at me when they were drunk. It was very uncomfortable because they were already married. And it was just sort of this very awkward situation. And I get this series of Facebook messages from this man saying, I miss you. I miss you. I really miss you. And I was so uncomfortable. I was just like, what on earth? What is this? I don't understand. So my initial instinct was just, yeah, I don't know what's going on, but I don't like it. But then the socialization, the conditioning kicks in. Like you said, we're conditioned to be concerned. And what if he's really not okay? Like, this doesn't sound like normal. Is he drinking more? What's going on? What if I don't respond and his feelings are very hurt and he feels very offended? And what if that makes his life worse in some way? And I'm here to help people make their lives better. And all of these things were going through my head.
Yeah.
I tangled myself up in knots trying to decide whether to respond to these messages. I went to my husband and I didn't, go into great detail, but I just said, I got these messages and I feel really uncomfortable. What should I do?
Yeah.
And without missing a beat, he just looked me right in the eye and said, you don't owe anyone an interaction.
There you
don't
go.
know him.
Yeah.
You don't know him. And I had this moment though, where it wasn't just that one incident. It was like when he said those words, my whole life, it sort of opened up and I thought, oh my God, I've been living for, 28 or so years thinking that I owe people interactions. And what if I didn't? How would my life change? What would my life look like if I didn't believe that one thing anymore?
Yeah.
And that's how the book came to be.
Oh, I love that story so much. Yeah, it's a massive shift in thinking.
Yeah.
Because so many of us, myself included, I was that person for so long. I can relate to so much of your book, including the religious cult-like aspect, which we could get into later.
Yeah.
But I really thought that if someone asked a question of me or decided to interact with me in any way, I owed them an interaction. And that is a huge shift in thinking.
It is.
I had it took me much later in life. I was well into my, 40s when an ex of mine reached out on social media and decided to start interacting with me. And you mentioned this feeling that you had. I had this feeling of discomfort. And my go-to programming, my go-to conditioning was push that aside, set that aside. That doesn't matter. How does he feel? How am I making him feel? He needs something from me. I owe him this. We have a past. We have a history. Of course I have to respond. And of course it has to be nice and compassionate and all of these things. And I'm thinking, but if I do that, then it will just encourage him to keep interacting, which is not what I want.
Correct. For me, the two biggest things there is if you are always the one who is willing to be the most uncomfortable person in the room, That is a dangerous space to be in. It's a dangerous space to be in because you're effectively saying, I am so unwilling for everyone around me to be in any way uncomfortable that I will do anything to avoid their discomfort. But that means that I push my own discomfort aside and I get into situations that make me very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And of course, it would be lovely if we lived in a world where, no one had bad intentions and everything was hunky dory,
Right.
but it's like, that's not the real world. That's not
Right.
where we actually live. And so to your point, there's this challenge around, okay, if I don't say anything, my internal narrative is like, you're going to sound like a bitch. They're going to think
Yeah.
you're like, you're
Yeah.
awful,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
don't say anything. But if I do say anything, like you said, then I'm encouraging something I don't want to encourage.
Yeah.
So you do feel like you're stuck. It's this catch-22 of like, well, what do? I don't want to be mean, but I don't want to be encouraging. So how do I shift this? And I think that for me, the answer is stepping out of that whole paradigm entirely, because
Mm.
that is all about how they're seeing you.
Yeah.
They're seeing me as mean or they're seeing me as encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
And your book as well is about this shift of like, well, how do I see me?
Yeah.
What do I think of my actions in this moment? As
Yeah.
opposed to just what do they think of it?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, you want to consider the other person, but if it's making you feel uncomfortable, you got to put a whole different hat on and say, wait, 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 wait. My responsibility is to me first. How am
Yeah,
I feeling? I got to take care of me. I'm the only one responsible for me here. Right. And it's really
that's
that
right.
shift of saying, how am I taking care of myself at this moment? And
Yes.
sometimes it might mean the other person's going to think you're rude. I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay. I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually okay with that.
Yes. It's been so interesting for me to have two children now. And there have been moments where, we were on the playground with them. I was wearing one of them. She was so little. She was just like a little baby, and the other one's a toddler. And these people came up to us with their dog, and they were coming very, very close
Mm,
to me and to our kids. And the dog was like straining it off the leash. And
mm.
I just shouted. I was like, get away, get back. Like,
Yeah.
it was immediate. It was very fierce.
Yeah.
And the thing I loved about it was obviously not the the danger and the adrenaline and the fear, but it
Right.
was like afterward, I thought I felt no shame, guilt,
Yeah.
hesitation. Like I didn't care what they thought of me. I couldn't have
Yeah.
cared less. And
Yeah.
in that situation, that was healthy. It was like, no, my priority must be my children's safety
That's right.
in this moment. But I think the reason it felt so strange was because we don't realize how much energetic bandwidth is going toward, I have to make sure that they're okay, and I have to make sure that they're seeing me this way, and I have to make sure of this. And it was like, it's a gift in those moments when that falls away and you're like,
Yeah.
that's not important. It's
Yeah.
important that I'm kind and I'm loving, but it's not important to be in your business about what you're thinking of me.
So good.
Yeah.
There's a really good quote that I love, and I don't have it memorized, but it's
Yeah.
just that. It's
Yes.
just that. It's whatever someone else is thinking of me is none of my business.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really not. We can't even be worrying about that. It just worrying about that will keep us not true to ourselves. And everyone really deserves the honest, authentic version of you.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I just want to share too, if anyone's listening to this and thinking like, but I do worry about that fairly constantly,
Mm.
and I feel bad about that. Part of why I wrote this book is not that you would feel worse about caring what people think of you,
That's good.
but I wanted to offer the stories as no wonder you care so much, and no wonder you're so scared to not respond to that email or, you know, be a little bit assertive, because that's been conditioned out of you. It's been
Yeah.
trained out of you again and again and again. So my point in sharing this, it's like, if you have trouble with this, it's not an accident. There are many forces sort of marshaled against you learning this lesson,
Yeah.
and it's not your fault. It is your
No.
responsibility to unlearn. But as you shared, Jenna, there's so much of our upbringing of conditioning and fundamentalism and all of these things. So it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you if you struggle with this.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Now, I would like to get into this. You talk in the book about the good girl conditioning. And that was a big one for you. And I love the vulnerable stories you share. And that's amazing that your memories are so vivid enough for you to share them with us like that. I wish I could. My stories going back that far are not that vivid, but that's great that you are able to recall them and understand where this programming and conditioning started. And I think it as well, we don't all have the same stories. This good girl or good boy conditioning is it happens in all types of families and all types of cultures and all kinds of systems. So would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your good girl conditioning and how that affected your behavior in this regard?
Sure, absolutely. For me, the first and most formative place where this showed up was in my family of origin. And I write about how my younger brother, Willie, is on the autism spectrum. And my first memory is of him being diagnosed. So being in a diagnostic center, waiting for our mom to come out from the appointment and her crying, me not really fully understanding what was going on. But I do have a memory of our parents sitting me down and, saying, your brother is different. His mind works differently and it's going to be okay. Like, we're a family and we love each other and we're going to stick together. But what we want to ask is, would you be a good big sister? Would you be a good daughter? And I remember feeling so shaken by that conversation. I was shaken by your brother is different. There's something going on here. But I was also so relieved to have been given an assignment. Like, that was so helpful to me. It was like, here's this big thing you don't understand. You don't really know. This is, 1990 in, the US, maybe 1 in 10,000 people were diagnosed with autism. It wasn't anything like what it is now. So it was this huge unknown. But I was being given a role. Yeah. Like, just be good and you'll be doing your part and everything will be okay. And it was like, I can be good. I can handle this. Like, yes. But then of course that becomes a problem when you think it's something you have to be that's other than you. Like, I have to be good because the implication is that I'm not good. You know what I mean? Like, I have to become something else. Yeah. And that to me is where it gets damaging. It's like, you can be helpful, you can be connected, but I don't ever want to tell my kids to be good because that implies that they're not. And I don't believe that anymore.
That's a good point. That actually deserves a moment, I think, because telling our children, be a good girl or be a good boy, implying that they're not. Yeah. That can create a lot of problems for people down the road, well into adulthood, no?
Yeah, because it's saying part of you is not acceptable. Yeah. And something I've been encouraged by and excited about is internal family systems coming much more into sort of the public eye nowadays. And a lot of the exercises in this book come from an internal family systems sort of theory and foundation. Nice. And the idea, a very, very, very simple summary, is there are no bad parts. Like, all of you is here for a reason. The parts might be at odds with each other. You might not immediately understand why a part is doing or acting or feeling the way it is, but it's not because it's bad. It's just because it hasn't been integrated yet.
Yeah, that's great. Gosh, if only every family would be able to have this information, I think our world would be a much different place. But unfortunately, we do all walk around with our traumas and our background and our conditioning and programming. You mentioned something in the book, this exercise, and we don't have to get deep into it if you don't want, but maybe you do. I don't know. But there was this exercise about reparenting ourselves, which I thought was really cool. I've actually heard this before. A friend of mine went through years of therapy. And one of the things that they found really helpful was going through this exercise where they tapped into their 8-year-old selves and wrote a letter to their 8-year-old selves. It's kind of like a reparenting exercise, and that it was truly transformational for them. And they were well into adulthood. It sounded kind of similar. Could you just maybe tell us a little bit more about what that was like for you?
Of course. And there's much more detail in the book, but
Yeah.
you can use opposite handwriting where the dominant hand is the adult, the non-dominant hand is the child. You can also do something as simple as you just take a little picture of yourself as a little kid and just sit with it and pretend to have a conversation with that little child. So that's more empty chair type work. And the idea is that it often helps to be able to sort of separate out that part of yourself and be able to see it as, for the moment, a separate entity. And you look at it and you just kind of come to this realization of like, of course, I think that little kid is fine the way they are. They're just being a kid. And then it sort of shifts this realization in you of like, well, when did I become not okay? Like, when did that change for me? And can I speak to myself? Can I be kind to myself in the way that I would an actual 5-year-old child? You know, can I recalibrate that relationship to myself in the way that, you know, you've never stopped being that little one. So why would you treat yourself with less love and respect than you would treat an actual little one? But most of us do not walk around seeing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're walking around with these wounded inner childs and being triggered from these old wounds. And you mentioned in your book a lot about healing those old wounds and going through the healing process. I love that. I think that's just so important because we do really need to go back and heal those wounds in order to see the world differently, right?
That's been my experience, at least, that when I started doing what I heard referred to as emotional level work instead of just mental level work, that was when things really started unlocking for me. Because mental level work, questioning our beliefs, like that's really, really, really important. We could spend a whole hour just talking about why that's important.
Oh, yeah.
There's plenty of that in the book. But there's also this element of if you don't learn to feel differently towards yourself or to allow yourself to feel the hurt that you've never felt before, then that part of you is always going to be stuck. And I'd heard it likened to, you know, it's emotional first aid. It's like when a part of you is hurting, the treatment that it needs is love. It needs you to love it, to witness it, to hold it. Without that, it can't complete the healing process. So if it's not seen and love is not applied the way you would apply like antibiotic ointment, you have to apply love to the hurting part. And that's how it heals. And so there's no one right way to do that. Like there's an infinite number of ways you can do that. But to me, that's the real point of, you know, personal development, all of these things. It's like, can you learn to love the parts that are hurting?
Yeah. You know, I know this is a little bit off topic, but not really. The subject of love, you know, I get really deep into it with self-love, but lately, and I have a series called Love Notes to Myself. It's an email series and I get in. Yes, I talk a lot about self-love, but I've been starting to get into more of the idea of just love in general. And what is love? You know, when we think about love, as it relates, well, we just think about love. What is love? If someone were to answer love, what is love? What you'd find on the first page of Google, what I've found is that, you know, it's having a deep affection for somebody else, right? It usually has to do with a feeling toward somebody else. And I was like, whoa, but love is so much more than that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if enough of us stop to really contemplate that and understand that because love is a powerful force. It's, you know, you mentioned using love to heal, you know, we need to give our love, not just to others, but to ourselves. And I think that this you don't owe anyone concept is rooted in self-love, which is a powerful force of healing among other things. No?
Certainly. Something I don't share in the book, one of the first times I ever did emotional work, which is, you know, in the way I learned it, just doing a dialogue with the part of you that's hurting. Like, okay, you know, 16-year-old self who feels incredibly alone, come sit with me, come talk with me. What's going on for you? What are you feeling? What do you need to feel loved and to feel safe?
Mm.
And the first thing that I said when I switched into that younger self was, I really miss my friends.
Mm.
And I just cried for probably 15 minutes straight. And this is
Mm.
in a group session with other people. So it was super
Wow.
embarrassing.
Wow.
They were all fine with it. I was just still embarrassed. But to me, the thing that was powerful about that was like, I had this huge wave of unfelt grief, unacknowledged grief, because
Yeah.
I had made my friends my family when my family wasn't a safe place. And then when
Mm.
our lives took us in different directions and we went to different places, I felt like I had no one. And it was just, I hadn't felt that devastation. But once I felt it, it was, you know, awful for about 10 minutes. But then it was the feeling you get after, I don't know, like after a rain when everything smells really fresh and you're just like, oh, it's clean now. Like now it's
Yeah.
clean pain. It doesn't hurt the same way it did. And I was just struck by, wow, like you said, yes, love is this deep affection that you have, but it's like just by talking to myself, just by relating to myself a little bit differently, I felt like I had healed something. And I was like, what is that? I don't know
Mm.
what name to put on that. Maybe that's love, but I was,
Yeah.
I was and still am amazed by it. I'll take clients through this work and it's just, you're meeting yourself, you're having some compassion for
Mm.
yourself, seeing
Mm-hmm.
through some of the lies, and they just look like they've been reborn. Like, oh my God, I'm okay now. Like, that to me is amazing. I don't know how to fully explain it, but I love
Well,
watching it happen.
sounds like the power of love to heal, love.
Yeah,
I just feel like it deserves so much more of a spotlight, which we're not going to get too deep into right here because I really want to, stay focused on your topic, but
sure.
it still comes down to love. I mean, it really does. It's amazing. And I can't wait to get more into that and further episodes down the road. I've got a lot of homework to do there, but I wanted to, bring in this quote from your book, which I absolutely
Mm,
loved. So many, by the way. I dog-eared and highlighted it all over the place. It is so good.
thank you.
Absolutely. And I love how you share so many of your vulnerable stories because, so many of us, myself included, I learn best through other people sharing their stories, along with some data and some research and some self-help and all of that. But the stories really help bind it all together for me. So I love your stories. But you mentioned in here in your book, you said, we believe others' needs are more important than our own. So we show up for them even when we're exhausted. And, it sounds to me like that was something that really resonate, was something that was big for you in your life. Maybe you can shed a little bit more light on that phrase right there.
And I wrote that before I even had children. So now I really
Wow.
understand that. Now I'm like, oh, you really do show up even when you are exhausted.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is part of the game.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the reality. But I think when it becomes a pattern, it's not that we get perfectionist about, I should never do anything when I'm tired or anything. It's like, no, sometimes life is going to require that of you. But when it becomes your constant reality of I'm always exhausted, I'm always drained, and I'm always trying to just give from this empty well, that that is when we start to get into a lot of trouble.
Mm.
And it's well intentioned. It's like we're just trying to be good. We're trying so hard to be good, but we're not being good to ourselves. And
Yes.
that's where things start to break and fray. Really, the first half of the book is like me completely ignoring what I need. And
Yeah.
the second half is me starting to, like you said, set those healthy boundaries, starting to just protect my energy, starting to, you know, let it matter that I'm exhausted all the time. Like, let that be a
Yeah.
thing that actually matters.
Yeah. That's a good point. Let that be a thing that actually matters because that shouldn't be a normal state of being. It's not okay. Do you
Right.
operate from that mode anymore? Not even given that you're a parent? Can you help it at all?
I love that you asked, yes, because I do certainly have moments where I need to be reminded. Friends will lovingly sort of say, remember, Caroline, you don't know
You
anyone.
you
Remember,
wrote the book.
remember that. Right. Like,
Yeah.
there's a great book on this subject. You might want to pick it up. I'm like,
Yeah, exactly. I love
fair.
that.
That's
I love
fair.
it when people throw your book back at you. It's awesome.
Yeah. I
All
bet
right. So
you can
I
relate
get
to
it.
that
I
too.
get it all the
Yes.
time, especially
Yeah.
those closest to me, because it is rather funny. The I
Yeah.
love me more. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good one. So, a big through line throughout your book is perfectionism, and I want to
Mhm.
hit on that for a second because, um, it seems like you definitely related to being a perfectionist. I did too, but not to the degree that you
Mhm.
are or were.
Mhm.
For me, a big aha moment, which I'd never heard of anything like this before, was realizing that my perfectionism wasn't necessarily a good thing. I
Yeah.
had built an identity out of it. It was part of who I
Yes.
was.
Yes.
And I thought it was a
Yes.
great thing. Hey, I'm a great asset as an employee, as a partner, as an everything because I am a perfectionist. Come to
Yeah.
find out, that was it's a fear-based belief. It's a limiting belief
Mhm.
that if
Mhm.
I'm not perfect, it won't be acceptable. We hold ourselves to a much higher standard than everyone else. Obviously, we're not allowed to make mistakes. Of course, other people are, but we can't.
Yes. Yes.
And I had never looked at it that way. I always thought it was a great thing. And so it
Yeah.
really just turned that idea on its head for me and shifted my reality in such a good way. Um,
Yes. Yes.
when did that come into your awareness and how does that look for you?
It's such a good distinction because you have striving for excellence or reaching for excellence. And then you have perfectionism, which is more like a denial of your own humanity.
Hmm.
Perfectionism for me, it's a refusal to accept your own frailty, your own limits, your own finitude. You cannot be all things to all people. You cannot get everything right all the time. It's this false self, essentially. And so for me, the recovery process has looked like, okay, who is the self underneath that false self? Who is
Yeah.
the one who was buried, who was suppressed, getting to know her.
Hmm.
Um, but that is a hard thing because, as you said, it gets really uncomfortable. Who am I without that?
Yeah.
I mean, even if going in, like, okay, I want to be easier on myself. I want my life to be more spacious. I want to rest more. I want to actually wake up feeling like I want to get out of bed in the morning. You can want that all you want, but once you actually start making the changes that are going to
Yeah.
lead you to that point, it's going to
Yeah.
be really uncomfortable
Super
because
uncomfortable.
you're going to feel like you're breaking all the rules of your
Mhm.
life and of
Mhm.
maybe your tribe. Like, I just want to put that out there as if you actually do this, it's going to feel really, really scary at first,
Yeah.
but you get to the other side of it. And I'll give sort of a micro example.
Yes.
At one point, I was working with a lovely coach who we were working with my patterns of hiding and sort of, don't notice me. I'm just gonna be the peacemaker in the background. And she challenged me to wear red lipstick for a day. That's very comfortable now, but at the time it was
Yeah.
like, you want me to do what? Oh, okay. And so I wore it to our local library, which is just about the most chill place you could imagine. Like, it was so low stakes, but I was so uncomfortable the entire time.
Mm.
I felt like a spotlight was on me. I felt like, I was breaking all the religious things about, I shouldn't draw attention to myself. The attention should be on God. Like, all this BS basically was coming up for me.
Mm.
And I walked out of the library and I remember thinking, like, I'm never doing that again. That was horrible. Like, that was so awful. But the thing is, nothing bad happened.
Right. Lightning
Lightning
didn't
didn't
come down.
strike.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing bad happened.
Mm.
And I was recently hearing one of my favorite coaches, Dr. Martha Beck, was talking about this is how you actually show your system that it's safe to make these changes, is that
Mm.
you do something small, like wearing red lipstick for me, but choose what it means for you. So if you're listening, think about what's a small change in my life maybe it's saying to your friend who wants to meet up, like, can we meet at my place this time? It doesn't have to be something huge, but just
Yeah.
enough that you're like, I'm really uncomfortable with this right now. Do it. And most of the time, nothing bad will happen. And
I like how you
that's
said most of the time.
right. If you're dealing with like, okay, someone who has a personality disorder or a narcissist, they really may freak out at you for
They
saying
might.
something like
Yeah.
that. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
real. But as much as you can, if you're with a safe person, someone that has a good track record of not causing
Freaking
drama.
out on you. Yeah.
Yeah. That most of the time it's like I wore red lipstick and nothing happened. And that is very valuable because it shows you in sort of this visceral way that like that lightning will not hit you. That's just a belief you have in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that fear of breaking that pattern. Your mind wants to create all these things that could happen, but it's false anyway. Speaking of love, fear is, as you probably know, what a lack of love, right?
Yeah.
There's love and a lack of love. Fear is just a lack of love, and
I'm so glad you said that. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
no,
but
you're good.
I'm obsessed with that idea that there is no such thing as cold. Like cold is measured as the absence of heat. Heat is the thing. Cold is just the absence. So that's how I feel about fear and love. It's like love is the thing and fear is just the absence.
That's it. It's just the absence of love. That's it. Yeah. If we could just, again, coming back to, I know I said I wasn't going to go there, but I'm doing it anyway. If we could just bring that concept back to there's no such thing as fear. It's just a lack of love.
Yeah.
Then you go, well, how can I heal this? You just bring love to it.
Yeah.
Right. And so in thinking of the red lipstick thing, it's like, well, how can I just bring love to the situation? Forget the fear. That's not real.
Yeah.
What is real? Well, I love me. I could wear red. I look good in red. Yeah. Like, you just shift perspective on it. I love it. Now you mentioned, about the cult in the book, and I know we don't have time to really get into that, but I just want to let everyone know that you had this, this background of being in a super fundamental religious cult. Was it Christian based?
I don't even know that it knew what it was based in. It was its own thing. It was its own weird thing. It was a combination of like Christianity plus Jehovah's Witness plus Mormonism plus a little bit of like Judaism historical stuff thrown in. It was its own mishmash, basically.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, you go into some great detail there, which I appreciate you doing that. So many of us have different backgrounds that are kind of similar. I relate. I was raised in a very Christian home, but it was, almost like a cult because, we could, like you, everything else was the outside world. So they get you in a little bubble there where it's you against the outside world. Yep. And it's Christian school, church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We could only listen to Christian music. Any kind of secular television, which is, non-Christian, was, potentially evil, had to be very heavily monitored. If it wasn't Leave It to Beaver,
right.
Probably
we couldn't do
work.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
God, no.
Yeah.
No, that was evil. We couldn't even do Scooby-Doo. It was like,
oh no, because there are ghosts and monsters and
that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, So I had a lot of deprogramming to do when I left home. But it was the same thing, right? We were taught to, and y'all, the reason why I mentioned this isn't to get into religion per se. It was more about talking about how we were conditioned, both Caroline and myself, to look outside of ourselves and not trust ourselves. We both learned, you shared this in your book, and I appreciate you doing that. And I related so much that, I could not look to myself for my own intuition, my own belief, my own, feeling. I was taught to deny that. We were taught to deny our bodies. Everything was looking outside of you, including the authority figures, whether it was your parents or the church. But they knew what was best for you. You didn't know what was best for you. And so that is what taught me to not trust myself, to abandon myself and self-sacrifice and worry about pleasing everyone else and all of that. I hadn't been taught anything else. I didn't know what that looked like. So if you're anyone watching this today and that you relate to that at all, just know that, like Caroline was mentioning earlier, when you go through this reevaluation and deprogramming and reprogramming, It can be really uncomfortable. It's scary. And you mentioned in your book guilt, and I would love to just hit on that for a second, because I think that's also super eye-opening. It was for me. Right. When
Yeah.
that guilt
Yeah.
feeling comes up, right? When you go against these beliefs, these ways that you were taught,
Yes.
and then you feel guilty. What is guilt? How would
Yeah.
you explain what guilt actually is?
Yeah, in the book, there's a moment, I think I quote Gabor Mate, where he talks about actually if a survivor of trauma, of fundamentalism, whatnot, is feeling guilty, it actually usually means it's time to celebrate because they're on the right track.
Love that.
It means they're actually making a change. You're actually going against the old order, but that's going to bring up really intense feelings of guilt. I mean, we could certainly talk about, false guilt versus real guilt. Yes, there's a place for if you have truly done something harmful, guilt has a function there. But really, 98% of the time when I'm talking to people and they say, I feel so guilty when blah, 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 it has nothing to do with I've actually done something harmful. It's the programming. It's the programming talking. And it's really interesting too, what you said about not being able to trust your sense of judgment, because there's this small moment in the book where my mom began attending this cultic church when I was, I believe, 6 or 7. And so before then we had celebrated sort of traditional, holidays, Halloween, Christmas, all that kind of stuff. And then afterward, those holidays were evil. So it was really confusing because it was like, I thought that was okay. No, that's not okay. Okay, I'm confused. And so I have this memory of her picking me up early from school, and this is multiplied over many years of like, I wouldn't, be in the Halloween parade. I wouldn't do anything involving Santa, because that was not okay anymore.
Yeah.
So she was picking me up, and I remember saying, can't I just march in the parade? Like, I just want to be with the other kids. Like, I just want to do the parade. And she was like, no, honey, we're God's people and we don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember saying, like, I just remember feeling so confused in that moment. And I just said, but it's just like a game of dress up, and we do dress up. Like, that's all they're doing is dressing up. Like, it's fine. Yeah. And she was like, no, that's not all it is. And going into the whole explanation. But when I was writing, I was grateful to come back to that moment and that just sort of innocent incredulity, like, but this actually isn't evil. This is just dressing up. Like, it's fine. And I see that now in my own kids. Like, if I say something that doesn't make sense to them, I'm grateful for this part of having had that experience. Because now as a parent, like, I actually know that means I'm doing a good job if they can bring that to me and they can say like, but this, what? I asked my older kid to do something and she said, but it's not my toy. Like, I asked her to pick it up and she's like, but it's not mine. I was like, oh, so you don't think you should pick it up because it's not yours? And she was like, yeah. I was like, actually, solid. Okay, well, that one over there is yours. Go pick up that one. Like, go do that. But I had this moment of appreciating, like, oh, thank God I've learned from that experience to not run roughshod over my children's ability to know what is true for them. It's not that I let them have a free for all, but if they question, if they bring something up, I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to take a minute and be like, actually, I see where you're coming from with that. That makes sense to me. Yeah. And being able to say, that's a way of loving someone, is not just sort of railroading over. Yeah. No, it's this way. It's got to be this way. It's got to be that way. And that's true with anyone, not just your kids, but it's your friends, it's your partner. If they're coming to you with something you don't understand, getting into that curiosity and being like, okay, tell me more about that. Like, why is it like that for you? As opposed to the temptation for all of us, I think, is to go into the defense of, well, that's not the way I think, and that's not the way it's been done, and like going. Yeah,
but then are we then teaching them to please us, and that what they think doesn't matter?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you were saying, fear or love, or you're in another word for fear is control. Like, I'm trying to control this versus I'm trying to understand what's actually going on for you.
Yeah, That's great. I love that you shared that. You we were talking about guilt there, and you talked about, is it Gabor Mate? Am I saying that
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
He's great. I need to get more into his work, but I've read a little bit and he's amazing. And I know he gets quoted a lot. So definitely someone, if anyone's watching right now, definitely check him out. I'm going to be reading more of his stuff. But uh, Nadine Macaluso, Dr. Nay, who is the ex-wife of the Wolf of Wall Street. I had her on another episode. She's
Oh,
a
okay. Hmm.
licensed family and marriage family counselor. She, and I know she's working on a book on trauma bonding right now, but she talks about this as well. And she says, I love how she said it. It was like, and I quote this in my book, which is why it's fresh in my mind. She says
Mm.
something like, guilt isn't necessarily an indication that you're doing something wrong.
Hmm.
It's more like an indication that you're breaking a habitual pattern.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Just that alone, I think, can be so transformational for so many people. Just knowing that we don't need to be giving into this feeling of guilt all the time. But yet, so many of us let that run our behavior. We don't want to feel guilty. And so we operate out of this guilt, whether it's
Yes.
overgiving to our own dismay, to our own disadvantage, or saying yes when we really want to say no, giving someone that time and attention when we really don't want to, when we feel uncomfortable, and we may even sense some danger,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we'd feel guilty if we don't, you know.
Yes, there is a little snippet in the book where I saw the pilot episode of The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and then I couldn't watch anymore because it struck too close to home for me
Mm.
because they're in this doomsday cult. But anyway, one of the women is being interviewed about it, and she talks about how, well, I met this guy outside of a steakhouse, and he wanted to like talk to me, and I forget how the quote exactly goes, but it's basically something like, and I didn't want to be rude, so here we are. And her
Mm.
meaning was like, I didn't want to be rude, so I spent 20 years underground in a bunker being a part
Unbelievable.
of a cult. And
Mm.
it sounds crazy, but we do a version of that all the time, constantly, of like,
Constantly.
I didn't want to be rude, so I got in the elevator with someone I felt terrified of, or, I got in the car when I knew someone was drinking, or fill in the blank here because I didn't want to be rude or I didn't want to
Yeah.
make other people feel uncomfortable.
I love it. Your book. You don't owe anyone anything.
Nope.
You owe yourself. You owe yourself. You owe yourself protection. You owe yourself your love. You owe yourself compassion. You owe yourself first. And I think that it's hard to get there. But once you do, doesn't it feel great?
I gotta say, it really does. Like, it feels very good to be done with living the way that I used to. And when I slip back into it, the great thing is I feel horrible and I feel exhausted and I feel resentful. And so that's a really good indication of like, something's not working here. So
Yeah.
if you are feeling exhausted, horrible, and resentful, it's just
Mm,
it's just like a warning light on your car. It's
that's
like,
it.
nope, you're running on empty. Something's wrong here. Got to stop and refill. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means these patterns are not serving you
Not
anymore.
serving you. Yeah. That's great. That is great. I think that's a wonderful note to end it on. And of course, I would love for you to share, a little bit about what you're doing now, how you help others besides just the book, which by the way is available on Amazon. I saw that it's a audiobook too, right? So you've got paperback,
Yes.
audiobook.
Yes.
Was there another version as well?
Yeah. Paperback, audiobook, Kindle or Nook,
Kindle Nook. Okay.
wherever books are sold.
Great. And then on top of that, you also do coaching with private clients. You have like free speaker series and stuff. What else do you offer?
Yes. So I work with a limited number of private clients. We do coaching, and essentially it is for the people who have always been willing to be the most uncomfortable person in the room. That is the person that I work with, the one who works very hard and shows up for others. And the shift that I love watching people make is going from, I'm really good at doing what I'm supposed to do, to I am doing what I'm meant to do.
Hmm.
And I decide what that is.
That's
Going
great.
from I'm so good at performing to, I am so good at just being who I am and being the way I always was deep down.
So I bet you have to work with a lot of the perfectionism stuff.
There's so much to unravel, but I love this concept that as a coach, my job is never to add anything. Like, I always come in being like, okay, yes, I have tools, I have ideas, I have things that I see and I can share and all that. But I come in knowing, okay, this person already has everything. They have everything they need. All we're doing is decluttering. We're just peeling some stuff off. Like, that's all. But I don't need to give them anything that they don't already have.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, that's good to know that we really do have everything we need. We really are whole on our own. We just need to uncover the stuff and deprogram some stuff to get there, right?
That's why I loved your book has that beautiful image of the heart with the fingerprints. And I just was so struck by that. I saw it at my library and I was like, that is so gorgeous because that's how it feels to me. It's like helping the client to sort of uncover the golden fingerprint of like, this is you. This has always been you. Nobody can take that away from you. It's just we gotta do some unlearning and some excavating to find who's underneath all of this. All the you owe it to us. You should really do this. This is what nice people do. Like all of that. What's underneath that?
So good. Well, before we go, can you just let everyone know how they can get in touch with you? Is there a website?
Sure. Everything is on my website, awishcomeclear.com.
Easy.
That phrase is courtesy of my younger brother, Willie. He thinks it's really funny to make jokes that are mistakes on purpose. So it's a wish come true, obviously, is the cliche, but he'll be like, it's a wish come purple. It's a wish come clear. And he thinks that's hilarious. And so I created the website with the intention of, I want this to be a space where you look at something that you thought was a mistake and you actually see the beauty and the power and you turn that on its head a little bit.
Oh, I love that.
That's where that comes from.
awishcomeclear.com.
Yes.
Well, definitely check out Caroline's website if you're interested in learning more, or even just signing up for one of her, she does the speaker series. She does a lot of fun, free stuff that's just really educational and enlightening and insightful. So definitely check out her website. And Caroline, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you having this conversation with us and just being so open and vulnerable and being here today.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm just really glad that we met. It was completely, I just picked up her book in my library and I said, I've got to email her because this is a moment that needs to happen. So
amazing how connections like that happen, isn't it? I mean, I love it so much. So thank you for emailing me and reaching out and agreeing to be my guest today. Really appreciate having you here. I hope you were able to get some great takeaways today from the show with Caroline. Wasn't she amazing? I love her so much. Hey, if we haven't connected on social media, you'll find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all at the same handle, which is at Jenna Banks .0. You'll also find me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, Jenna Banks, and stop by my website if you're interested in signing up for my free Love Notes to Myself series. They are little bite-sized self-love reminders that I send out every Monday through Friday. I think you'll hopefully find them quite inspiring. And really the goal is to help you bring more love into your life, not just through self-love, but really just to have a different way of looking at love and how powerful of a force it can be in all aspects of your life. So again, that website is jenna-banks.com. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope to see you again next time. And remember, your love is your power. Until next time.